I was myself, probably. Welcome everybody to the Pyrenees Ordinary Meeting Council of 21st of September 2021. As the meeting chair, I give my consent for this open council meeting to be streamed live, recorded and published online. Anyone who is invited to read out a question or a presentation will be recorded, and their voice, image and comments will form part of the live stream and recording. The public is able to view this live stream via our website at www.pyrenees.vic.gov.au. Should technical issues prevent the continuation of the stream, a recording will be made available on our website. Prayer. Heavenly Father, we ask you to give your blessing to this council, direct and prosper its deliberations to the advancement of your glory and the true welfare of the people of the Pyrenees Shire. Amen. We acknowledge the people past and present of the Wadawurrung, Jar Jar Wurrung, Eastern Maar and Watchabollock tribes, whose land forms the Pyrenees Shire. We pay our respect to the customs, traditions and stewardship of the land by the elders and people of these tribes on whose land we meet today. I call for any apologies? No apologies. Councillors or officers, any disclosure of interest, conflict of interest?
I do have one for item 13.1.2, an indirect one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keogh. Call for confirmation of the previous minutes. The minutes of the ordinary meeting council held on the 17th of August 2021 and closed meeting council held 17th of August 2021 as previously seconded. The council be confirmed. Can I have someone move? Moved, seconded. Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. There was no business arising from the previous meeting held on the 17th of August 2021. That brings us to the public participation. Question time. Members of the public are encouraged to ask questions of council at ordinary council meetings. Questions that are received by 12 noon on the day of the meeting. The chairperson or councillor or council officer to whom a question is referred may immediately answer the question or take the question on notice for the next ordinary meeting. Members of the public are unable to attend this meeting in person but can make a submission on an agenda item in writing either online through the council's website, by mail or hand delivered. Submissions again are to be received by 12 noon on the day of the meeting. I do have some questions here that were received from the public, and I thank those people for taking the time to pen those questions and forward them on. The first question is from Christy Bell of Carnham. The question is, will council fly the rainbow pride flag from the council chambers on the 17th of May next year, being International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia and Transphobia? Ms Bramwell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you for the question, Ms Bell. Council is strongly committed to being an organisation that's fully inclusive for all and are supportive of the proposal to fly the rainbow pride flag on that day. This will be done in accordance with Australian flag protocols, which will mean that as we have only 2 flagpoles, we will be unable to fly the Aboriginal flag on that day, but we do commit to flying the rainbow flag. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramwell. And we do pride ourselves in this organisation being inclusive, fair and equitable to all those different agendas. So it's really, really good and it's important, and we certainly support that. The next question is from Ian Murdoch of Carnham. He supplied 2 questions. The first question is, I commend the council's new engagement hub on the council website. In particular, the contributions by the community panel offered promise for a more actively engaged council in community engagement and consultation. What tangible actions is council creating and presenting to the Shire's residents, and how will council encourage and facilitate communities' productive activity in the processes? Mr. Nolan, I think that's with you.
Thank you, Mr. Murdoch, for your question. Thanks, Mr. Murdoch, for your question. I have some notes prepared here by our communications officer, so I'll speak to those notes in response to your questions. Council undertook a step forward in respect of deliberative engagement process when it undertook its community vision. We look forward to the opportunity to carry out further in-depth engagements in the coming year for the development of our asset plan, our long-term financial plan, and our municipal public health and wellbeing plan. Yes, the engagement hub that is on Council's website at the moment is a new piece of software. It was launched in the last month or so and is a replacement of a previous piece of software known as Our Say. This engagement portal offers the opportunity for the public to have direct involvement in potential new ideas, such as the dog off leash park, or to comment on pieces of policy such as community vision and a council plan, which are currently on exhibition through the Engage Hub at the moment. One of the key actions in our council plan is to embed community participation into our project management framework, which means that our major projects will have a thorough community engagement component. Council is actively engaged in encouraging input via this method, as it is a far more interactive way, and the engagement hub also has opportunities for live polls, idea submissions, and we can contact the public directly through the hub. Council is currently preparing new engagement strategy and will provide details on the different ways that we engage through our community moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. There's a second question from Ian Murdoch. As part of the data provided in the document, I note that council's information shows 24.5% of households have no internet access at home. I suspect most of those unconnected households are rural dwellings. When seen in the shadow of the recent debacle of information of changes to waste services, roadside collection, where council's CEO claims the survey in particular was widely promoted in printed press and internet media, how does council propose to overcome this distinct disadvantage to that 24.5% of households when any public notice is to be issued? Mr. Nolan.
Again, I thank Mr. Murdoch for this question as well. The first part of the question refers to the lack of internet access by a large percentage of the community. And Mr. Mayor, if you access the NBN rollout mapping, you will see that the majority of the Pyrenees Shire actually does have access to internet coverage. There's quite wide coverage across the Shire. However, there are a range of reasons why members of our community might not have connected to the internet at this point in time. Part of that is to do with cost, to get the connection and then to meet an internet plan. Part of it could be because the speed of connection doesn't meet their needs. Part of it could be that they don't have a need for connection at this point in time. And many of the elderly people in our community may not have the know-how. And council does advocate strongly to government and agencies such as NBN Co for improved access to internet coverage across the Shire. And acknowledging the fact that there are a number of our residents that currently do not have access to the internet, it is important that council has a range of methods of communicating to our residents so that we can fill the gap through this range of strategies to encourage engagement. Council has provided quarterly printed newsletters to all postal addresses in the Pyrenees since 2014, and will continue to provide this newsletter. Council is committed to providing as much notice as practical and in as many formats as possible. Other means of engagement include through our weekly advertisements in 2 local papers. We're actively promoting the option of calling council to have paper versions of our notice board posted to them. We provide hard copy surveys when we survey our residents, and documents are available through our resource centres. And our resource centre staff are receiving training on how to help customers use the online engagement portal. Council has and will continue to send out direct mail where appropriate and when time permits. For instance, Council recently posted out a flyer showcasing the items of note on the draft budget and invited public feedback through that process. We also sent hard copies of a waste calendar out to our community. Council will continue to hold community cuppa events around the Shire. Council has had this practice in over a number of years now, meeting small remote communities at each end of the municipality face-to-face for engagement with our communities. And whilst COVID restrictions have limited council's ability to do that, there is certainly intention of council to continue that form of engagement with our communities. Displaying information on engagement opportunities at our resource centres and our notice boards across the Shire is another means of engaging with our communities, including determining where notices can be displayed in other townships outside of Avoca and Beaufort, such as at milk bars and general stores. Key engagement methods will include council officers going out into communities as well and engaging directly with our stakeholders. For example, attending markets, such as the Beaufort Town Market, to invite people directly to provide feedback to officers participating at those events, or in high traffic areas when consulting on particular projects. Council has a small communications team, that is 2 part-time officers, one of whom has been made possible through some financial support through the state government. And we endeavour to get as much information out as through as many channels as possible. We're always interested in any other ideas that our community might have and how council can improve its ability to reach as many of our residents as possible. So if you have any ideas that you want to bring forward to council, there are a number of means that you can do that. You can email pyrenees@pyrenees.vic.gov.au or telephone our reception on 1300 797 363, or drop a note into one of our front counters, which will be passed on. Thanks, Ms. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan, and thank you, Christy Bell and Ian Murdoch, for taking the time to pen those questions and forward them through for consideration and response. And I'd just like to say that the councillors enjoy, and the officers enjoy, getting out at the community cuppas, getting around the countryside to all those little out of the way places particularly, and unfortunately restrictions have prevented these recently, but I can safely speak for all councillors and officers that get involved in that we're certainly looking forward to those community cuppas recommencing as soon as possible. Okay, that brings us to item 10, items for noting. Councillors, we've had an opportunity to have a look at those items for noting. Is there any questions in relation to any of those items? Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a couple of items, if I could ask questions on, please. The first one is the Assets Committee. Ms. Bramwell, I noticed in reading through the reports, a number of the committees are reasonably financial, but I do notice a couple in my patch, notably Warburg have only got about $1,200 in the bank and Brewster have only got $100. Are council officers able to just make inquiries of those groups that they do have sufficient funds to meet any of their debts as and when they fall due, just so they can keep themselves chugging along, please?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Clark. Yes, we officers are keeping in close contact with our community asset committees. As from earlier this year, we've made a concerted effort to make sure that we're much more available and supportive of our asset committees. And we have recognised that some are experiencing financial difficulty purely because of lack of revenue through COVID. And we have supported one of our committees already in giving them additional funding for fuel bills and things like that. So we do commit to continuing to work closely with the committees to identify where pain points exist and what support we can give them to keep operating efficiently. Thank you.
I think that's a very valid point. Thank you. That a lot of these committees, we've been in and out of lockdown, and the times have prevented them from doing fundraising events and all those things that would normally generate some extra money. So they're relying on the money that they've had, and I'm sure many of that must be running quite short. So any further questions, Councillor Clark?
Thanks, me. Just one more, and this is Ms. Nolan. It's not really a question; it's more a comment. But I think it's really appropriate that we get the project report on a quarterly basis, Mr. Nolan. Thank you very much. And I'd certainly say to anybody who is wondering what is Pyrenees Shire up to every day, go and have a look at that report and see the number of projects, the sheer volume of projects that we've got right across the municipality. And you'll get a sense of where we're getting out and about in our community and doing good work.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. And yes, when we have meetings, and I sit on some of the meetings with regional mayor meetings, etc., we constantly see Pyrenees batting above their weight, so to speak, or batting above their average. So that's really pleasing to see, but it's hard to keep up that momentum sometimes. But, you know, credit to the councillors and the officers and the CEO that we do constantly bat above our average. So that's really, really pleasing. Keep up the good work. Councillors, any further questions in relation to any of those items for noting? If not, can I have someone move that they be accepted? Councillor Eason, second, and Councillor Clark. All those in favour? Thank you. That moves us to item 13, items for decision. 13.1, asset and development services. It's in relation to PA 2856-19A-1, planning permit application for the use and development of a dwelling and shed amendment. I think that's you, Mr. Gowans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to provide Council with information that is relevant to making a determination on an application for an amendment to planning permit PA 2856-19A-1 for the use and development of a single dwelling at Crown Allotment 15, Smyesdale, Snake Valley Road, Hillcrest. A planning permit was issued in September 2019 for the use and development of a single dwelling at the subject site. The permit applied to the property, which included 4 lots in the same ownership. Now, the permit was granted subject to a condition requiring consolidation of the 4 lots. The property was sold and purchased by 3 separate owners in October 2020. An amendment to the planning permit was sought and granted by Council in May 2001, which permitted an alteration to the house siting and design. Due to the change in land ownership and recognising that consolidation may now be challenging, officers include an additional condition that provided an option to enter into a Section 173 agreement as an alternative to consolidation. The applicant seeks to have the consolidation and 173 condition removed. The site is contained within a restructured parcel, which contains 4 lots. The restructure overlay provides specific planning measures to identify old and inappropriate subdivisions, which are to be restructured. The restructure overlay plan number 18 requires that any restructured parcel that contains a greater number of lots in the parcel than the number of dwellings that may be constructed must be subject to the following. Lots which have no dwelling entitlement must be consolidated with another lot or lots for which a dwelling entitlement exists, or an agreement is entered into under section 173 of the Act, which stipulates that such land may not have a dwelling. Based on the size of the restructural parcel, only one dwelling can be constructed. This requirement is supported through the broader planning policy framework, which seeks to discourage development of isolated small lots in the rural zones, limit small lot excisions, and encourage the effective restructuring of inappropriate subdivisions. The removal of condition 6 from the planning permit is contrary to the provisions of the Pyrenees Planning Scheme and the Pyrenees Planning Framework. In conclusion, the applicant holds a valid planning permit which enables the construction of a dwelling at this location. The proposed planning permit condition amendment does not comply with the objectives of the Pyrenees Planning Scheme, specifically the restructure overlay and applicable state and local planning policies, and therefore should not be supported. And the officer recommendation reflects this conclusion.
Thank you, Mr. Gowans. We have a recommendation there. Councillor Clark.
I'm happy to move that with a slight addition, if I could, please. If that could come up on the screen, please, Jane. Thank you. There's a third point that I've added, if I can get a seconder.
So we've got a seconder, Councillor Reeson. So we've got an alternative recommendation there. Would you like to speak to that, Councillor Clark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is an interesting situation in the sense, and I think it's a very much a family trying to do the right thing by each other in the sense of this. But saying that, I think the rules that we have that apply are there for good reason, and they need to be supported in this sense. So I think council is, I think, quite right in its insistence to continue with the section 173. And the section 173 really effectively makes it very abundantly clear, should those land blocks be sold to different owners, that there is no capacity to put another dwelling on another block there. And that's the advantage of it, the strength of it to council in the process of this. However, in this situation, it is the belief, certainly of the council, that a section 173 agreement is probably something that can be done at a relatively simple form in this context, and hence the third part of the recommendation, which is that council will facilitate the creation of a section 173 agreement and bear the normal costs of preparing, executing, and registering that agreement to the Register of Titles in this case. And this is the privilege of these things coming to council, that we can deal with these things a bit on a case-by-case basis when we look at the facts. So I look forward to the other council's support.
Councillor Easton, would you like to speak to that?
No, I support the motion.
Any other questions? Councillor, like to speak to that? So all those in favour? Thank you, that's moved. I'd probably just like to say that it's important for people to understand that Pyrenees Council, we surely do encourage development, and you know, we have got a lot of interest in our area. We've got a lot of interest, people wanting to decentralise. So certainly these type of things are under the spotlight. But I just can't stress enough the importance of anyone contemplating developing. Please contact our council, our planners or councillors, and engage in that communication so that to make sure that you're clear on any necessary steps or adherence to regulations that may be required, so that you take that confusion out of that development. So that's really, really important. So thank you. 13.1.2. Thank you, Councillor Keogh. It's in relation to PA 21078, planning permit application for the telecommunications facility at Avoca, and Councillor Keogh has left the room as she's declared a conflict of interest, which is very pleasing. Thank you. Mr. Gowans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to provide council with information that is relevant to making a determination on a planning permit application for the use of land for a utility installation, in this case a telecommunications facility, and development of an antenna and associated works at lot 19 at 6 Blackney Drive, Avoca. The application proposes to install a new satellite earth station which allows reliable and consistent access to internet services for commercial businesses. The communications facilities include a telemetry, tracking and command satellite antenna that measures 9.1 metres in diameter, a switchboard, control board, a generator and equipment cabinets that are contained within a 900 square metre compound. Notice was sent to 20 neighbouring landowners and was also notified on through Council's website. 3 submissions were received in relation to the application during the notice period. The grounds of the submissions have been described in the report below and effectively include issues such as affect aesthetic appeal to surrounding lots, emitting radiation, affect land values and ability to run a business, potential environmental and emission risks and hazards, and sensitivity to mobile phone radiation. The planning scheme and planning policy framework seeks to facilitate the orderly development, extension and maintenance of telecommunication infrastructure to provide facilities that are widely accessible and meet the needs of business services. Such facilities should be provided with minimal impact on the amenity of the area and be consistent with orderly and proper planning. The industrial zone seeks to support business investment and provide for industries and associated uses in a manner which does not affect the safety and amenity of local communities. The objections made against the application have been considered by officers, and officers provide the following information in the report. In terms of aesthetic appeal, officers acknowledge that the antenna may be viewable from neighbouring properties. However, are satisfied that through the provision of visual screening, that amenity impacts can be minimised. In regards to the emitting radiation and sensitivity to mobile phone radiation and potential environmental and emission risks and hazards, officers suggest that a telecommunication facility must be designed and installed so that the maximum human exposure levels to radio frequency emissions comply with the radiation protection standard prepared by the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency. This standard specifies the limits of human exposure to radio frequency fields to prevent adverse effects and specifies the basic restrictions for occupational exposure, general public exposure, and equipment and usage parameters. The applicant has engaged an independent radio frequency and radiation hazard consultant to undertake an assessment of the proposed facility to determine what electromagnetic emission levels will be generated. This assessment has concluded that the proposed facility will operate in compliance with the Australian standard and that the EME level would be well within the health and safety standards established by the Australian government. In relation to the submission on land values, the responsible authority may reject an objection which it considers has been made primarily to secure or maintain a direct or indirect commercial advantage for the objector. In this case, council cannot consider land values in the assessment of the application. In conclusion, the proposed use of land for utility installation, telecommunications facility, and the development of a telecommunications antenna and associated works accords with the objectives of the Pyrenees planning scheme. The objections made against the application have been assessed against the scheme and are not considered to provide a sufficient basis to refuse the application. Therefore, it's the officer's recommendation that council, having considered all matters required under Section 60 of the Planning and Environment Act and the provisions of the Pyrenees planning scheme, determines to issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit under the provisions of the Pyrenees planning scheme for the use of land for a utility installation and development of a telecommunications antenna and associated works at Lot 19 at 6 Blackley Drive, Avoca, subject to quite a number of stringent conditions, including looking at the amenity impacts, noise impacts, also any waste generated by the site, vehicle access, landscaping plans, requirements, visual screening, and also with some standard timeframes around starting and completing the project.
Thank you, Mr. Gowans. Yes, certainly is a fairly substantial amount of conditions in that recommendation. So, councillors, You have a recommendation there. Would someone like to move that? Councillor Vance, seconded by Councillor Eason. Councillor Vance, would you like to speak to that, please?
Mr. Mayor. A great deal of thought has been put into this proposal by the councillors. It's not something that we just. A great deal.
May want to started to speak. Great deal of thought has been put into it. We don't make these sort of decisions lightly. From where I sit, I believe it is going to be a wonderful asset for the community and improve connectivity for to the satellite immensely. It's been one of the factors in the region where we live that connectivity to the for our computers is important. It's slow at the moment. If it can improve the pace in any way, shape or form, it's got to be a plus. No doubt the objectors have a fear of the unknown, as we all do, but we've got to move on. It's 2021, moving closer to 2022 every day. And I believe it'll be a plus for our region. So I'm happy to propose.
Thank you, Councillor Vance. Councillor Eason, would you like to speak on that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is one of those sorts of reports and applications where we rely very, very heavily on expert understanding of radiation levels and the like. None of us here around the table are expert in these fields, and we rely heavily on the report coming to us having had all those bits of information checked out. The information put in a more layman's terms that makes me understand it better is that a baby's monitor that we have in near the cribs at home would provide probably 4, 5 or 6 times the amount of radiation expected to be put out by this installation. So I believe that the radiation element of this project is insignificant in the overall life that we lead today, and I support the measure.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clark, would you wish to speak on that?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I think this is the first of these for council, and maybe not the end of it, given the amount of satellites that are going up in the air in that sense. It is a little different in that sense. So I think, as Councillor Vance says, we want to be cautious, and we note the objectors that spoke to us today, and one of them particularly who is affected by electromagnetic radiation more than the normal person in that sense of things. So I think it is important that we do our due diligence. Mr. Councillor, am I correct in understanding that effectively we are only but we're only but one step in the process, because there is effectively a licensing process again, which really looks at the electromagnetic stuff in much more depth and with more expertise probably than we as a group of lay people have in the context of this project actually being approved and going ahead?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Clark, for your question. That is Council's understanding that this is only the first stage in terms of the use and development of the land. How the licensing of any electromagnetic radiation producing facility works has to get a licence, and the responsibility at a federal level undertakes regular monitoring of that, and there's regular reports that are put through that to ensure that there isn't a risk to the community.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen. I think Council can take some assurance from that there are other regulatory bodies that are much more expertise in these areas to look at that, and I'm happy to support the application.
Yes, I thank the landowners who took the time to address the council at a briefing prior to this meeting, and certainly we do take on board what that mention was, and it does generate a lot of discussion when we've got the people presenting to us, and certainly after that we have those discussions around the table. So certainly all those submissions get discussed fairly carefully, and I thank those landowners for taking the time to address them. So we have a recommendation there, councillors. All those in favour? Thank you. Could we have councillor Keogh back in, please? Thanks, councillor Keogh. This brings us to 13.2 Corporate and Community Services, 13.2.1 Procurement Policy. Ms Bramwell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This report is for council to consider adopting a revised procurement policy and a supporting S5 instrument of delegation to the Chief Executive Officer. Section 108 of the Local Government Act 2020 requires council to prepare and adopt a procurement policy by 31st of December 2021 and must review the policy at least once during each 4-year term of council. The existing procurement policy was reviewed and revised in accordance with new requirements contained within the Act, and the review was undertaken in consultation and collaboration with other councils to maximise the consistency of approach across the sector. Many of the former requirements of a procurement policy remain similar under the 2020 Act, including the overarching principles governing procurement. However, one change is the removal of a prescribed financial threshold over which council must enter a formal tender process. In the 1989 Act, these thresholds were provided as $150,000 for goods and services and $200,000 for works contracts. Section 108 of the 2020 Act now requires that a procurement policy must include the contract value above which council must invite a tender or seek an expression of interest, allowing for councils now to set their own reasonable limits above which formal tenders must be sought. Until a new procurement policy is adopted by council, former thresholds remain in place. Discussion and benchmarking with other Victorian councils indicate that many of the new thresholds vary between 250,000 and 300,000. And it should be noted that the former thresholds included within the 1989 Act were very long standing and had not been increased for some time. Discussion outcomes have recommended a maximum procurement threshold of 300,000 over which tender process must be taken. Of course, this does not preclude entering into a tender process if it's considered appropriate beneath that amount. And it's considered that the 300,000 threshold for all procurement allows for a reasonable cost increases since the former thresholds were introduced and allows for a simpler process with only having one limit rather than two in the previous Act. Subject to council consideration and approval, the S5 instrument of delegation from council to the CEO has been amended to allow for the change or the proposed change in financial level up to which the CEO may authorise without the need for council approval resolution. So this financial level has proposed to be raised to 300,000 to align with the recommended threshold in the procurement policy. Council consideration of proposed threshold changes and adoption of the revised procurement policy and instrument of delegation is now requested. And it's the officer's recommendation that council approves an increased procurement threshold of 300,000 over which a formal tender process must be entered and decision made by council resolution. That it adopts the Pyrenees Shire Council Procurement Policy 2021 and adopts a revised S5 instrument of delegation from council to the Chief Executive Officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramwell. Councillors, we have a recommendation there. Would someone like to move that? Councillor Easton, someone like to second it? Councillor Keogh, Councillor Easton, Councillor Keogh. Any councillors wish to speak on that? All those in favour? Thank you. Moves to 13.2.2 Community Grants Program 2021-22. Ms Bramwell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of this report is to seek council approval of the Community Grants Programme and amended policy and guidelines for 2021-22. Council has allocated $84,000 in the 21-22 budget to fund the Community Grants Programme. And the Community Grants Programme is generally conducted twice per financial year, round 1 in September, October, and round 2 in March, April, with funds distributed to successful applicants prior to the end of December and July of each year. The Community Grants Policy and supporting guidelines have been reviewed for application in 2021-22 and are attached to this report for Council consideration and adoption. Issues relating to COVID-19 impacts for community groups continue into this financial year, including lockdowns preventing groups from meeting face-to-face to identify or discuss projects, a lack of sophistication throughout rural areas with the use of technology to meet virtually and the lack of internet access, and the difficulty in getting contractors to quote on projects. It's likely that those barriers will be with us for some time. To recognise those additional issues that our community groups must contend with at present, we have proposed some changes for this financial year, including increasing grant funding limits, and these are different for different categories, but as they haven't been raised for some years. Removing the co-contribution requirement for the next financial year to recognise the lack of revenue that is affecting many of our community groups. Allowing more than one application within the same financial year. So it's proposed that community groups will be able to apply for perhaps round 1 and then another application in round 2. Although preference will be given to community groups who haven't received an award in the first round. The introduction of a new youth grant, which addresses youth as a priority in the community vision and council plan. And a special circumstances provision that if there is an immediate need in the community for support through a council grant outside of the normal grant round process, officers have the capacity to bring a specific project to council meeting for a determination. And in respect of that last dot point, it has been brought to council's attention that the Warburg Hub Asset Committee, Community Asset Committee, has recently had the need to buy a mower to maintain the recreation reserve surrounds Oval and at the cemetery. The old mower is unserviceable and the purchase is not able to be delayed due to the spring grass growth requiring attention. It is understood that the community is also seeking funds from other sources, as well as seeking up to $5,000 from council. While retrospective grants are not, as a general rule, are not recommended, where there is a genuine special need, council can use its discretion to distribute funds from its grants budget for this purpose. It is proposed as well to open the 2 rounds within 2021-22 financial year. Round 1 from the 1st of October to 31st of October 2021, and round 2 from Tuesday 1st of March to the 31st of March 2022. Scheduling both rounds now will give some certainty to community groups for forward planning. So the officer's recommendation, therefore, is that council approves the proposed new youth grant category, approves the proposed increase in maximum allocations for grant categories for programmes, projects and equipment up to $2,000. It was previously $1,500. Inclusion and diversity programmes and projects up to $1,500. Previously it was $1,000. Events up to $1,000, which it was previously $750. The youth grants, which is a new category, up to $1,000, and community capital grants up from $5,000 to $7,000. And that council adopts a revised community grants policy and supporting guidelines for this financial year, approves the opening of community grants round 1 from the 1st of October to 31st of October 2021, approves the opening of community grants round 2 from the 1st of March to the 31st of March 2022, and allocates $5,000 towards the purchase of a new mower for the Warburg Hub Community Asset Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramwell. Councillors, we've got a recommendation there. Councillor Easton, seconded by Councillor Clark. Councillor Easton, would you like to speak on that?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. community grants are a way we as councillors have an opportunity to support groups within our community that work hard and support their own communities. It's something that creates joy in my term here as councillor, because it's an opportunity to support those smaller groups in a way that really helps them. I do propose a change to the report in this instance, where it is recommended that there be only one grant per round, and have that removed. I find that in the recent past, we have been undersubscribed because people have not put in requests for grants. And in that instance, if anybody has put in 2 or 3 requests, I believe they should be eligible for a grant. If nobody else wants the money, that money should be able to be moved around the community as available. If my fellow councillors would like to support me on that.
Just reading through, that's my understanding that that's already been put in place. Is that right, or is that Ms. Bramwell? It's allowing more than one application within the same financial year.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you for your question, Councillor Eason, or your recommendation, Councillor Eason. The guidelines and policy currently that have been proposed indicate that a grant, only one application per round can be given, but unlike previous years, applications may be made for more than one grant in a financial year. So if I'm interpreting Councillor Eason's request, what you're saying is that, but the guidelines, sorry, also say that only one application can be accepted within a round, so only one category can be accepted. So if I'm correct in understanding your recommendation, it is that you want them to be able to apply for as many as they like, as long as within the same round, not just within the same financial year, as long as no one else is requesting the money, so that we actually do disperse all the grant funding. So.
That's right, Mr. Bramwell. The limitation of 1 per round is removed, but we leave in that preference will be given to those that have not received any funding previously.
Thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Councillor Easton. Is anyone like to support that? Would you like to speak, Councillor Clark?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. And this is a little bit of a tricky one because we're kind of debating the policy stuff, which is here for us to approve today. And I'm very happy. I've got complete faith in our officers that we would approve the policy tonight, subject to this change. And I've also got a couple of other minor ones I'd like to suggest. Just talking to Councillor Easton's proposition, effectively the policy as proposed to us tonight says that any group can apply for 1 grant per round. And what Councillor Easton is saying is let's make it they can apply for more than 1, because in the next clause of the policy we have the capacity effectively to say we'll give priority to those that haven't applied before. So we have a way to check and balance that, but we want more applications is really what we're trying to say to the community. Please give us more applications of your worthy projects and let us determine then what we can do with the money so that we can get the money out to the community. So that makes huge sense to me. The 2 little ones, Ms. Bramwell, I would like, if we could, is that we have got also in the policy that we've deliberately put in there because of COVID that a co-contribution is not required. And I think that's a very, very appropriate thing, but I think it should be appropriate for us to say that a co-contribution is encouraged. And it's a fairly simple little change in that sense if that was able to be done. And the final one is the policies also talk about a selection criteria that the officers of council will use effectively to bring us a priority list for us to determine at the council meeting. And I would think it's appropriate that that actual selection criteria is part of the policy so that the community can actually see the basis on which we make those assessments. So if if that's acceptable, I'm very happy to support this policy in that sense. And not just to talk a little bit more about point 6, which would be a little bit of a strange one, I think, for councillors when they first saw it. But it was one of the weaknesses of our initial policy, was that if you had an issue with a bit of kit and it happened to fall within a grant round, you just got lucky and you got your money. But if you fell outside that, you missed out. And of course, the mower at Warbur's died, and this is the best time to go grass at Warburg. I did offer the football club 100 cows, but they were not particularly happy about that idea on the oval. So that offer had to be withdrawn. But effectively, council, we have an option at the moment to secure a second-hand mower for $22,000 ex-GST. We think we'll get about $5,000 for the old one. $5,000 from council is terrific help towards that, and then we'll get $12,000 from other sources, mostly probably from the community fund, and that'll mean we'll hopefully have a new mower as at next week, and we'll be able to get the grass cut. Away we go. So terrific help from council, if council's supporting that. Thank you very much.
So we've got some changes to the program there. Would someone like to move those? Councillor Eason. Someone like to second that? Favour of those changes? Thank you. And we have a recommendation there. All those in favour? Thank you. I'm really pleased, Ms Bramwell, to see the inclusion of the youth grants. As we know, they're hurting equally as much through these times and through the restrictions that they've been subjected to. So I think that's really pleasing, and I think it is a good idea to change it where we can have multiple applications, because we quite often are undersubscribed. And, you know, hopefully we get to the stage where we're oversubscribed, and that's probably a good problem to have. And although we have to work through it and apply the process, it probably would be a really good place to be in if we were oversubscribed. But we'll see how we go, and I do encourage people to make those applications. And I thank the council for removing, the officers for the consideration of removing some of those requirements because of COVID, and it's just another way that council has been supporting the community through these times. So I thank Ms Bramwell and the people involved in developing that policy there. So that's really good. That takes us to 13.2.3, financial statements for the year ended 30th of June. Ms Bramwell, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of this report is to present the 2020-21 financial statements to council for adoption in principle, and the authorisation of 2 councillors, normally being the councillor members of the Audit and Risk Committee, to sign the audited statements before being submitted to the Auditor General for certification. The Local Government Act 2020 requires that council complete at the end of each financial year financial statements with respect to producing an annual report. Producing an annual report and the annual financial statements is one of the key reporting requirements of the new integrated strategic planning and reporting framework implemented by the Local Government Act 2020. So the financial statements have been prepared in accordance with the requirements of the Act, Local Government Planning and Reporting Regulations, and Australian accounting standards. In accordance with Council's governance protocols, the reports will be presented to Council's Audit and Risk Committee for review and recommendation to Council for adoption in principle and authorisation of 2 councillors. Being the councillor members of the Audit and Risk Committee to sign the audited statements. That meeting is on Thursday. The following is just a brief snapshot of our 2021 financial position. We had 27.3 million revenue, including 11.4 million in rates and service charges, 9.6 million in operating grants and 5 million in capital grants. Capital grants included 2.1 million in roads to recovery funding and 1.2 million in local roads and community infrastructure funding. We also received grants for community projects, including the Lexington Community Hub, Avoca Inclusive Play Space, Snake Valley Skate Park, and the Carnham Recreation Reserve female-friendly change rooms. 12.72 million capital expenditure programme was delivered, and council claimed its full allocation under the 2021-21 Roads to Recovery programme by completion of all works by the end of June. Additional grant funding received has significantly improved the council's asset renewal ratio. And other key points are operating surplus of 3.23 million, cash holdings of 12.9 million at the year end, part of which relates to grants received in advance for 2021-22 financial year, and council continues to be debt free. The attached financial statements therefore have been prepared in accordance with the requirements of the Act. Council's Audit and Risk Committee will review the statements at its meeting on Thursday, and the statements will then be submitted to the Auditor General for certification. Council is required to authorise 2 councillors to sign on behalf of council. So the officer's recommendation is that council, in accordance with section 98 of the Local Government Act, adopts in principle and submits the 2020-21 financial statements to the Auditor General for certification, and authorises council's Audit and Risk Committee representatives, Councillor Ferrari and Councillor Eason, to certify the 2021 financial statements in their final form after any changes recommended or agreed to by the auditor have been made. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramwell. Councillors, we've got a recommendation there. Councillor Clark, seconder. Councillor Vance. Councillor Clark, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. And sometimes these numbers can be a bit bewildering, but the real essence of council is to get money from the community and spend it on the community. And this year, I think the key thing is that we've had significant extra capital funds to spend in that sense of things. I do know a couple of ratepayers often say to me, you've made a big profit, and we've made a big profit again this year, or we call it a surplus of $3.23 million. And as I often try to explain to them, that's actually not quite the truth, because as Ms Bramwell has alluded to a little earlier on that page, we got 2.1 million in race recovery funding on the 28th of June for this financial year. And we got 1.2 million in local roads and community infrastructure funding on the 20th of June. Now, those dates might not be quite right, but basically we got it in the last financial year, and the rules say that we had to declare it in that year. So our $3.2 million profit is actually about a $70,000 loss, which I think is exactly what we're here to do. We're here to get money from the people and spend it back on the people. So yes, a very good report, and a good year for council, and terrific to have been able to do so much in the community with that extra money.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Vance, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just reiterating Councillor Clark's comments, and the bit that echoed to me loud and clear at the finish was we're still debt free. And that's amazing to consider that we've spent all that money and still come through debt free is a great compliment to our very capable staff, both indoors and outdoors. And through you, Mr CEO, I'd like you to pass on my regards to those staff anyway. We're very proud of I am very proud of the Pyrenees Shire and the way we operate. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillors wish to speak to that? I think it's interesting to note that our rates and services revenue collected by the council is just under 50% of our required operating revenue. So I think that's something really, really important for the our community to understand that, you know, our revenue and rates is just under 50%. So we have to find that other money, and the amount of work that goes on behind the scenes by the administrators and the office people and the directors and everyone involved, indoor and outdoor, is incredible to make up that extra money and try and stretch that money to make it go that little bit further, because we, of course, are always looking for more money. Who isn't in an organisation? But a lot of times it's not forthcoming, so we have to make do with what we've got. And I do say that you know, there's so much work that goes on to try and make that money spread out evenly across the municipality. And I also, as Councillor Vance said, I congratulate the CEO, and I congratulate all the workers, indoor and outdoor, on how they we get the best bang for our buck with that money, and considering that we're quite often behind the 8 ball. So thank you very much for that. So councillor's got a recommendation. Are all those in favour? Thank you. That brings us to 13.2.4, the quarterly finance report, 1st of July 2020 to the 30th of June 2021. Ms Bramwell, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of this report is to provide council with an update of the operating and capital financial performance for the 12 months from the 1st of July 2020 to the 30th of June 2021. The report compares the current budget against year-to-date actuals for each operating programme and for all capital works in the 2021 financial year. Council finished the financial year with an unadjusted working capital surplus of $6,106,000. Once carried forwards are factored in, council has a working capital surplus of $1,710,000. That's 1.7 million, isn't it? Sorry. Carried forward. As at 30th of June, my apologies. From that surplus, $800,000 has been reserved in case of a call from the defined benefit superannuation scheme, or in the event of unexpected expenditure, such as a natural disaster. $427,000 was allocated in the 2022 budget. This leaves an available surplus of $483,000, which council may elect to allocate to other projects. There are various parts of the report that is highlighted in the body of this report, but council's overall result was 1.268 million, favourable to the amended budget. A couple of other points in the year. Council delivered 74% of its forecast capital programme. It was an extremely large programme, but so some has been carried forward to the next year. Net carry forwards of 624,000 for the capital programme. Cash and investments at the 30th of June total 12.933 million, which includes 2.59 million for the long service leave and annual leave provisions. Trade debtors are 1.028 million, which includes outstanding rates from prior years, current year rates, and other miscellaneous debtors. Loan liability remains nil. Yes. Employee provisions are 2.59 million. Cash and investments at the end of the year total 12.933 million, which includes that long service leave and annual leave provisions. And the officer's recommendation is that council receives its financial report for the year to date, 30th of June 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramble. Councillors, we've got a recommendation here. Would someone like to move that? Councillor Eason, a second. Councillor Keogh, would you like to speak to that, Councillor Eason?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Again, similar to the previous report, this only comes about because of the work of the team here at the Pyrenees Shire. And that team worked diligently to take whatever money we can find and scratch up and put it into services for our community. And we do a damn good job at it. And I think the staff need to be thanked appropriately by us as councillors, and wherever possible, our community should pat them on the back, because without these staff doing their bit in our big wheel, it doesn't get done.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Keogh, would you like to?
Thank you. Just getting that mic on. I'd just like to second that again, and just to thank our staff in order to help us to be the best stewards that we can of the money that we're in charge of. So thank you.
Any other councillors wish to speak on that? Councillor? All those in favour of that recommendation? Thank you. That brings us to 13.2.5, draft financial plan. Is that you again, Ms Bramble?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Mayor. The purpose of this report is to present the draft 10-year financial plan for 2021-22 to 2030-31. Section 91 of the new Local Government Act 2020 requires that by the 31st of October 2021, Council must develop, adopt and keep in force a 10-year financial plan. The financial plan provides a long-term view of the resources Council will raise and the proposed predicted use of those resources to meet its social objectives. The plan is informed by the revenue and rating plan and defines the broad fiscal boundaries for the council plan, asset plan, other subordinate policies and strategies and budget processes. Council will leverage off its existing 10-year financial plan, and it is anticipated that the plan will be updated on a rolling basis to maintain financial sustainability. The draft financial plan is based on the adopted budget for the 21-22 financial year and is presented utilising the local government Victoria template. The financial plan, or the draft financial plan, is being guided by a range of strategic actions as shown in item 2.2 in the attached plan and are also detailed in the body of this report, which I'll take as read. And the draft financial plan is based on the adopted budget with adjustments made for carried forward works from the 2020-21 financial year, council decisions made after the budget adoption, e.g. the allocation of additional funds to complete the Lexington Hub, adjustments for confirmed funding to be received for the financial assistance grants, and a reduction to the original budget for insurance costs. And it's the officer's recommendation that council places the draft financial plan on exhibition for public comment, utilising the communication strategies outlined in the report, and reconsider the draft financial plan for adoption at the 19th of October 2021 council meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramwell. Councillors, we've got a recommendation there. Would someone like to move that? Councillor Clark, someone like to second it? Councillor Vance, Councillor Clark, do you wish to speak to that?
Yes, Mr Mayor, just quickly to say that we do send a lot of these things out to the community for consultation and comment, but to my mind, this is the most important document that we send out because it tells you what we intend to do and what we need to do over the next 10 years in terms of maintaining the assets we do on behalf of the community and also the money that we need from the community to do that. So certainly encourage anyone in the community to ask questions, make a comment, get in touch with us, talk to us about it. We'd really love to hear from them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Is there any other councillor wish to speak to that? Yes, I certainly agree, Councillor Clark. It's important. It is a very important document, probably one of our most important documents. And I do encourage the community to read it. And even if they don't make a submission, I think it's important that they understand where the money's going to and the work that's gone in to make all these big wheels go around. So that's really, really important. Great work again by the financial people and the people behind the scenes to put this plan together to put it out for the community for a comment. So all those in favour? Thank you. That brings us to 13.2.6, the lease renewal of the old railway station Avoca. Ms Bramwell, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of this report is to seek council direction on the potential renegotiation of lease arrangements for the premises at Railway Lot 1, 18 and 21, York Street, Avoca, commonly known as the Avoca Arts and Gardens Precinct, Old Railway Station, Avoca. Lease arrangements, which we would call the head lease for the old railway station between Victorian Rail Track, VicTrack, and Pyrenees Shire Council commenced on the 10th of February 2017 for an initial period of 5 years. At the same time, a sublease was agreed between the Pyrenees Shire Council and Avoca Community Arts and Gardens Incorporated for the day-to-day management of the site and for the same period. Both lease agreements end on the 9th of February 2022. The head lease reference schedules allow for 2 further terms of 5 years and 1 further term expiring no later than 31st of December 2035. And another item in the head lease reference schedule provides for the last date for exercising the option for the further term to be 3 months before the expiry of the first term. What that means is we have to notify VicTrack before the 9th of November 2021 if we want to exercise that extension. Council is therefore requested to provide direction on whether a new lease for a further term of 5 years should be requested of VicTrack. The current permitted use is detailed as a community hub, arts centre and garden precinct, provided that the tenant must not use the premises wholly or predominantly for the sale or hire of retail goods, or the retail provision of services within the meaning of the Retail Leases Act. The gallery and public exhibition space are well established and known at the location. And although council has provided support over the past 12 months regarding governance matters, the current tenant of Avoca Community Arts and Gardens Inc. is also well established and supported by the local community and runs an active gallery with regular exhibitions being held when permitted. The organisation has recently expanded its arts-related interests in the town, being appointed as Council's Community Assets Committee for the newly acquired premises north of the Avoca railway line, and successfully applying for funding to paint a mural on the silo located on that site, increasing the attractiveness of the area to visitors. Plans are in place to further expand that site to attract more community use and increase tourism. The Avoca Community Arts and Gardens Inc. have indicated their interest in renewing their sublease with council, remaining as tenants of the site. And the council is now requested to consider whether steps should commence to renegotiate both the head lease between Victrac and council and the sublease between council and the Avoca Community Arts and Gardens Inc. And the officer's recommendation is that council directs council officers to ask Victorian Railtrack to commence renegotiation of a new lease over the premises at the premises formerly named for a further term of 5 years commencing on the 10th of February 2022, and directs council officers to commence renegotiation of a new sublease with Avoca Community Arts and Gardens Incorporated over the same premises for a further term of 5 years commencing on the 10th of February 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramwell. Councillors, we've got a recommendation. Councillor Clark.
I've got an alternative there. It just changes the second recommendation, please. Second, Mr. Mayor.
There's an alternate recommendation there, councillors. Have we got a second of that? Councillor Vance. Councillor Clark, would you like to speak to that, please?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's quite a simple change, but it just effectively is to say that we should renegotiate the sublease at the moment for an initial period, and I say very much an initial period of 2 years. Council officers are working with the Avoca Arts and Gardens around some issues at the moment, and I think it's appropriate that we just keep the lease a little shorter at this point in time while we continue those negotiations.
Councillor Vance, any other councillors wish to speak on that? We have the alternate recommendation there. All those in favour? Thank you. That brings us to 13.2.7, delegations. You again, Ms Brown, you're quite busy tonight.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to request council's review and adoption of updated delegations and instruments of appointment and authorisation. Council has reviewed the instruments of delegation, subdelegation and appointment and authorisation in accordance with advice provided by Maddox lawyers. 2 instruments, one S6, which is an instrument of delegation from council to members of council staff, and S18, which is an instrument of subdelegation by council under the Environment Protection Act. The review has accounted for changes, including format of the instrument sections now includes full titles of delegated officers rather than initials to improve clarity and ease of understanding. Updates received regarding legislative changes, and section 18 is a new instrument of subdelegation required under changes to the Environment Protection Act 2017. And the recommendation is that council, in the exercise of the powers conferred by the Local Government Act 2020 and other legislation referred to in the attached instruments, resolves to adopt the following instruments, which is the S6, instrument of delegation by council to members of council staff, and S18, instrument of subdelegation by council under the Environment Protection Act 2017. That the instruments come into force immediately the common seal of council is affixed to the instruments and remains in force until council determines to vary or revoke them, and that council affixes the common seal to the instruments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramwell. Councillors, we've got a recommendation there. Would someone like to move that? Councillor Easton, seconded Councillor Keogh. Would you like to speak to that? Anyone wish to speak to that? All those in favour? Thank you. 13.2.8, Grampians Communities of Respect and Equality Core Alliance. Ms Bramwell, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider reaffirming their commitment to being a member of the Grampians Core, which stands for Communities of Respect and Equality Alliance. The Pyrenees Shire Council originally committed to supporting the Grampians Core Alliance and their initial strategy at their meeting of the 17th of May 2016. In the intervening period, Council has undertaken and completed an Act at Work programme which aimed to challenge sexism, discrimination and violence against women. And this programme agreed to key principles and completed a 3-year action plan to improve the education and awareness for our staff and introduce actions to create a respectful workplace culture and increase gender equity. Since Council's initial commitment in 2016, Government has continued its focus on the prevention of violence against women and their children and gender equity by introducing the Gender Equality Act 2020, compliance to which Council is also committed. Council officers also participate in a Victoria Police-led Community Safety Advisory Group, which has a focus on violence as a component of community safety. Prevention of violence against women remains a key priority in both the existing municipal health and wellbeing plan and the draft plan revision currently under construction. In 2021, Women's Health Grampians and the supporting Core Alliance members developed a new core strategy, which was recently launched, a copy of which was attached for councillor information. As part of the launch, Pyrenees Shire Council have been invited to recommit to the new strategy and a new core commitment charter, which sets out the minimum requirements for membership of the Core Alliance. The commitment charter commits Council to undertake activity on challenging attitudes and beliefs around violence and inequity, improve practices, policies and systems to eliminate gender inequality, work collaboratively with Core Alliance partners to build momentum, gain strength and share knowledge, resources and ideas, and communicate on what is working and what is not, and monitor our progress. The new strategy remains evidence-based and reference statistics outlined below and many more. I'll just read a couple of comments there. The Grampians region experiences high rates of family violence. In more than half the local government areas in the Grampians region, the family violence incident rates are above the state average. And women living in rural areas are more likely than those in urban areas to experience family violence and face additional barriers to reporting and escaping abuse, mainly around geographic isolation, limited access to services and a lack of anonymity, just to mention a few. And COVID-19 and associated restrictions have done nothing to alleviate the risk. And while we readily acknowledge that men are also victims of violence, and the Core Alliance believes that no level of violence is acceptable to anyone, Core is firmly focused on preventing violence against women and their children, because the data tells us that the overwhelming majority of perpetrators of family violence are men, and the majority of victim survivors are women and children. I myself remain Council's key liaison with the Core Alliance and Women's Health Grampians and a member of the Core Alliance Leadership Group. And through this report, the Council is required to reconfirm its commitment to the Core Alliance, its new strategy and charter, and continue the shared journey in creating a community where women and children live free from violence, abuse and discrimination, which will require all of us working deliberately to achieve gender equality. Only together can we change the attitudes, stereotypes and inequality that allow violence to thrive. My apology for using this as a platform. The officer's recommendation is that Council expresses its support for the communities of respect and equality, preventing violence against women and their children in the Grampians region 2021-2025 strategy, reaffirms its commitment to ongoing participation in the Grampians Communities of Respect and Equality Alliance and supporting charter, and authorises the Chief Executive Officer to confirm this commitment by signing the Core Commitment Charter on behalf of the Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bramble. Councillors, a recommendation then. Anyone would like to move that, please? Councillor Easton, we have a seconder. Councillor Vance. Councillor Easton, would you like to speak on that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This area is a no-brainer in my book. Respect and equality, equity, protection of women and children, they're all things that we should all stand for. And as a community representing group, the Pyrenees Shire, we should try and lead this as much as we possibly can. There are people out there, and I've heard various young ladies and their terrifying stories, and it makes me cringe. So I support this motion with every fibre of my being.
Here. Thank you, Councillor Easton. Councillor Vance, would you like to speak on that?
Just to reiterate what Councillor Easton has already said, it leaves me dumbfounded to think that violence runs amok in this country that we live in. We've got everything we could really wish for. When we look at countries on the other side of the world and the deprivation that they've got to live through, just leaves me cold, and I'm more than happy to support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Vance. Any other councillors? Councillor Keogh?
Just wanting to reiterate, when you look at those statistics, 1 in 5, and that means that we do hear of these cases and know of these cases, and anything that we can do to support people, and especially in light of COVID and the impact that's had on a lot of relationships and things. So we look forward to being able to support people and to try to bring down those horrible statistics. Thank you.
Councillor Clark. Yeah, look, it's a really important philosophy to subscribe to, and we know that the statistics since COVID-19 that and restrictions and people in lockdowns, that unfortunately family violence has increased. It's certainly my belief, and I'm confident the belief of every person in this room and this organisation, that no woman or child should be subjected to violence or controlling behaviours. It's not acceptable. Not in this organisation, not in the community, not any time. So, and it's up to all of us to stand up and call that out and break the family violence cycle or those cycles. And the only way we can do that is intervention. And I just want to quickly say about intervention, that doesn't necessarily mean intervention in a physical altercation where you put yourself in harm's way. There's many ways to intervene. But what I encourage people to do, if someone knows something's happening, please tell someone, tell the relevant authorities, tell someone to get something done about it so we can break those cycles. Otherwise, those people are going to continue to be subjected to those behaviours. And it's not just physical, it's financial, emotional and psychological, and they can all have profound effects on the victims. And then that has a flow-on effect. So if it's happening to the wife, it flows onto the children, the family, school suffers, everything else. So it's such an important thing, and I'm so pleased and proud that Pyrenees Council takes on this mantra, and I see what they do in relation to providing the safe, respectful and equitable workplace, and I commend them on that. And I can't speak on this enough. I could continue on, but I support this wholeheartedly and in and out of work and in my personal life. So, and I encourage other people, particularly men, to support this philosophy and intervene where they can and break that cycle. So I've said enough. I could say a lot more, but it's so important and dear to my heart. But we have a recommendation there. All those in favour? Thank you. That brings us to 13.2.9, performance statement and know your council admission for the year ending 30th of June 2021. Again, Ms Bramwell, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Lots of reports at the end of the year.
Yeah, indeed.
The purpose of this report is for Council to give approval to the performance statement for the year ended 30th of June 2021, and to provide, that will be approval in principle, and to provide Council with an overview of the data to be submitted to the Know Your Council website, which is usually made publicly available in October of each year. Two key mechanisms are used for councils to report to their communities and government on their operational and financial performance at the end of each financial year, one of which is our key report, the annual report, and the other is the local government performance reporting framework through the Know Your Council website. Councils are required, in addition to other information, to prepare an audited performance statement for inclusion in the annual report and provide a copy of the auditor's report on the performance statement to council members. That isn't actually available yet because the audit is just in its completing phase. But Section 99 of the Act requires a performance statement also to be certified in accordance with regulations by 2 councillors, authorised by council, and the principal accounting officer. Council currently has Crowe as its appointed external auditor under subcontract by the Victorian Auditor General's Office. And Crowe conducted the external audit of the 2021 financial statements and the performance statement during the period 23rd of August to the 3rd of September. The audited draft financial statements were provided to council under an earlier report, and the financial statements and performance statement for the financial year ending 30th of June 2021 will be tabled at Council's Audit and Risk Advisory Committee on Thursday. In addition to the annual report inclusions, councils submit and publish data regarding their annual performance against a set of indicators within the local government performance reporting framework. And data submitted in accordance with that is published on the Know Your Council website. Both draft documents were provided for council information. There's just a few contents within the data that was provided to you that I'd just like to point out to you. One is pools. The utilisation of the pools reduced considerably in the year. Impacts of a short season for outdoor rural pools, COVID-19 restrictions on public activities and a very cool summer. The cost of pools per visit is $58.72 per visit, compared to $36 for similar councils and 18.5 average for all councils. Contractual issues did result in a 1-year temporary contract being implemented for the last season at additional cost from the previous year, but this is more likely to be nearer the true cost of operating seasonal pools than the previous tender. Libraries. Participation in the libraries was a service highly impacted by COVID over the last year, disrupting the ability of borrowers to access collections, particularly those that rely on the mobile library outreach service. And council was unable to realise plans to expand the mobile library outreach service after the purchase of a dedicated vehicle, again due to COVID restrictions. Rates. Expenses per property assessment was $3,939 compared to $3,483 for similar councils and an average of $3,320 for all councils. Unlike other statistics and figures, the figure impact is one statistic where a higher number is a good statistic, as it demonstrates council's commitment to ongoing improvements in the community interest. But it is impacted by the receipt of non-recurrent grants that enable council to spend more money where it's needed. And the average rate per property assessment, another measure, 1,462, less than similar councils at 1,512, and the average of 1,786 for all councils, which shows that we are still working hard to keep our rates down. Asset renewal and upgrade is at 112%. Although the long-term budgets calculate this as around 80 to 85% over the future years, the use of grant income for the past couple of years shows the impact that the increased revenue makes on our efforts to improve critical infrastructure. This is a new measure introduced last year, and although we are forecasting a similar result in the next financial year, it's likely that external grant funding will return to normal levels from 2022-23 onwards, so may reduce from those high levels. So in conclusion, council is required to prepare an audited performance statement and publish performance data in accordance with the local government performance reporting framework. And this report provides an overview of those statements for the last financial year and seeks council authorisation for certification. And it's the officer's recommendation that council adopts the 2021 in principle, the 2021 performance statement, subject to any final changes recommended or agreed to by the auditor. In accordance with Section 99 of the Local Government Act 2020 and Section 13 of the Local Government Planning and Reporting Regulations, authorise the following persons to certify the 2019-20 performance statement in its final form after any changes recommended or agreed to by the auditor have been made. That would be Council's members of the Audit and Risk Committee, Councillor Eason and Councillor Ferrari, Council's Chief Executive Officer, Mr Jim Nolan, Council's Manager Finance, Mr James Hogan, acting as Council's Principal Accounting Officer. And also the Council notes the information to be submitted for publication on the Know Your Council website in accordance with the Local Government Performance Reporting Framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramwell.
Just may I just say that I've said the 2019-20 performance statement, it should be 2020-21.
Thank you for
My
that
apologies
correction, Ms Bramwell. Councillors, we've got a recommendation there. Someone like Councillor Clark, someone like to second it. Councillor Eason, do you wish to speak on that? Councillor Eason, anyone wish to speak on that? Thank you, Ms Bramwell. I think, we've had a lot of reports come to the council as we sit in the year, and I just think it highlights some of the legislative requirements placed on officers to produce these reports and ensure compliance and governance things are followed behind the scenes. So, that we put it in a page, but the reality is they take many hours to research and put the information in and make sure that they cover the legislative requirements and are subject to the compliance and governance rules. So I just think that it's important to note that for the public to see that how hard the people behind the scenes work. So all those in favour of that recommendation, thank you. That brings us to 13.2.10, rate arrears as at 30th of June 2021. Ms Bramwell, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of this report is to provide an update of rates and charges currently outstanding as at 30th of June 2021. The report provides a comparison of rate arrears outstanding at the end of the financial year and against the past 6 years. And the property revenue team are currently working to reduce the level of outstanding rates and charges, and provided you a breakdown of accounts in the body of this report. The percent of outstanding against rates raised with arrears has increased since the last year, in line with council's, well, probably the assumption can be made that part of it is due to COVID, but also council's decision to suspend all legal action on accounts with debt collection agencies. Hardship status has been assigned to 13 assessments, 8 related to the Lexington Brent major bushfires that occurred in December 2019 and 5 in response to COVID-19. And together these instances resulted in the higher balance outstanding. And it's the officer's recommendation that council notes the information contained in the report and seeks a further report on actions taken to recover outstanding rates at a future council meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms Bramwell. Council's got a recommendation there. Councillor Eason, seconded Councillor Vance. Do you wish to speak on that? Councillor Vance, any officers, any councillors wish to speak on that? Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. 13.3.1, reconciliation plan and protocol. Is that you, Mr Nolan? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, the purpose of this report is to inform council and to seek council's continual support in respect of the reconciliation plan and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander protocol guide. Council adopted a Reflect Reconciliation Action Plan 2019-20 in February 2019. And council was required to develop a RAP as per the recognition and settlement agreement between the Dja Dja Wurrung people and the state of Victoria. That initial Reflect RAP endorsed by Reconciliation Australia was a 12-month action plan and required the formation of a working group consisting of traditional owners, community members and other relevant parties to implement a number of specific actions focused on three key pillars of relationship, respect, and opportunities. Some of the key actions that were completed through that RAP were to ensure appropriate acknowledgement of traditional owners, to hold cultural awareness training for councillors and staff, installing acknowledgement of country signage at council-owned buildings, and organising National Reconciliation Week and NAIDOC Week events. As the RAP was completed in October 2020, and to continue on with the reconciliation journey, the Reconciliation Plan 2021-2024 and the Reconciliation and the Torres Strait Islander Protocol Guide have been developed. This new plan reaffirms Council's commitment to actions for advancing reconciliation and focuses on three key themes of partnership, recognition, and empowerment. The Protocol Guide is a guide for council officers and councillors with guidance regarding engagement with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people. It provides practical advice on the appropriate use of terminology when engaging with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community and assists in understanding culturally significant protocol when delivering programs and services within the Pyrenees municipality. The development of these two documents has been in consultation with the Reconciliation Advisory Committee. In February of this year, a call for expressions of interest from interested community members to be involved in the Reconciliation Advisory Committee was undertaken. There were 13 expressions of interest received, with all of those being invited to join a committee. This committee is made up of traditional owners, community members and other relevant parties, and council staff has provided advice and guidance in the development of the plan and protocol. The terms of reference for the committee provide for at least 2 meetings a year, and the first of which was held in May of this year. It is intended that the plan and the protocol documents be made available for the broader community to access via council website, and that we continue to promote the activity of the committee through various media and thereby raise awareness and encourage community participation. In the preparation of this report, I'd also like to thank my executive assistant, Jane Bowker, who's been instrumental in guiding and assisting the activities of this group. And in conclusion, councillors, I'd just make the recommendation that council provides continuing support to the development of the Reconciliation Plan and Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Protocol Guide, and provides in principle support for the adoption of the plan and the guide in the future. And I make that recommendation on the basis that these are both working documents.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan, and thank you, Jane, for your work with that committee. That's important because that's not about just developing committees, but it's about supporting them when they are developed and making sure that they do feel supported and they are included in our activities. So thank you for that. So we've got a recommendation there, councillor. Someone like to move that? Councillor Clark, second, and Councillor Kerr, would you like to speak on that? Councillor Kerr, any like to speak on that? Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. 13.3.2, Australia Day events. You, Mr. Nolan, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And look, I start again by acknowledging the work of Jane Bowker, who's been instrumental in coordinating Australia Day events across the Shire for the last couple of years. And also, as a part of the purpose of this report is to seek expressions of interest from community groups that wish to facilitate Australia Day events in their communities over the next 4 years. Council groups who express interest will need to be able to provide a suitable venue to make arrange morning and afternoon tea and a barbecue for members of the community that attend those events, with council organising the formal part of the event. And there is financial support council provides for that to occur. The expressions council received were from the Warborough Community Hub and the Beaufort Rotary Club. And in addition to this expression of interest, Council had previously received from the Avoca Country Women's Association an expression of interest and earlier in the year, and they've advised that they are still interested in holding an event in Avoca. It is outlined in the report the locations of the previous events that have been held across the Shire since 2014. And just to remind the community, last year the successful event was held at Trawalla. Prior to that was Avoca. Prior to that, Moonabel. In 2018, it was Beaufort. 2017, it was Amphitheatre. Before that, in 2016, it was Warborough. In 2015, Avoca, and in 2014, the event was held in Beaufort. Mr. Mayor, on the basis of the submissions and the expressions of interest from those organisations that we've received, it's recommended that Council endorses that the host township and organisations for the Australia Day events for 2022, 23, 24 are as detailed in this report, which sets out that in 2022, the township be Warborough, with Warborough Community Hub being the host organisation. In 2023, the township of Beaufort, with the Rotary Club of Beaufort as the host organisation. And in 2024, in the township of Avoca, with the Avoca Community Women's Association as the host organisation.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. Councillors, we've got a recommendation there. Would someone like to move that? Councillor Vance, second, and Councillor Easton. Councillor Vance, do you wish to speak on that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, it's very pleasing to see that we've got 3 applicants in for the next 3 years. It's always a little bit unnerving if you don't get any, but it's lovely to see that we've got 3. And it's great to see that Warborough put their hand up. They're one of the smaller communities in our magnificent Shire, and I'm sure they'll do a great job. They've got great facilities at Warborough, so I'm looking forward to a very enjoyable day next January. And as I reiterated, nice to see that the next 2 years are locked in as well.
Thank you, Councillor Vance. Councillor Easton. Any other councillors wish to speak on that? Yeah, thank you. It's an important day, and I'm glad to see we've got those next 3 years locked in. And the previous 3 events have been really well organised and well attended, and it's very interesting. Had some great time. So I do note in the body of the report is some uncertainty about how the events will be hosted. So we just all can hope that at that time next year we'll be out of lockdown, or there won't be any restrictions. And it's a lovely sunny day, and we can actually physically get out there and be together and enjoy that day, because so much work goes into it being organised.
And we can mark the over there 4 weeks if we need you.
Yes, correct. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Clark. So we have the recommendation. All those in favour? Thank you. Okay, that brings us to item 14, councillor reports and general business. You might go to Councillor Keogh first, please.
Thank you. I guess the biggest change we've had in our area in the Mount Emu ward, as has the other areas, is the new curbside waste collection. So that has been new, but we've got a lot of information out there. There's a few teething problems that are still being worked through, but overall I think it's been quite a successful rollout for those people, and we're still waiting on those bins, of course, but that will come about, and I think the more information we get out there, it's wonderful. So that's been the newest thing. I guess across the Shire too, we've seen COVID-19 vaccinations are humming along, and I think it's really important to note that there are regional centres such as Beaufort and Avoca, which might be easier alternatives to the larger hubs to be able to get those vaccinations and even those tests. So we're very fortunate to have that as we continue through this next phase of lockdowns of neighbouring areas and that sort of thing. I guess the other thing I wanted to mention too is we are getting, it's becoming a little bit like jet lag, getting through these lockdowns, but I still think it's so important to highlight the generosity of people and the positivity that people are still showing each other and supporting each other as it can drag on. But as we wait for the vaccinations and those things to get to a point where we can sort of get back to normal. So I just wanted to make note of that again, and also, you know, continue to thank our health workers, our teachers who have got our kids through the term again. You know, they've been so good, and even having seen them on the Zoom sessions and lessons, it's so wonderful how they pep our kids up and support our youngest children who are part of our shire. As Councillor Ferrari had alluded to, we really need to protect our youth at this time. On that note too, again, we keep talking about this, and we're running our great little initiatives to support local businesses and competitions, but please remember our people, our small businesses really need our support. So they've been amazing how they've changed the way they've worked to be able to still provide services to us. So we need to remember to continue to do that. The only other thing I did want to highlight too, Mr. Murdoch, who addressed council, it's really positive to know that we can reach out to people in regards to wanting to get their feedback on different council initiatives and services, etc., through our engagement hub. So I wanted to thank the staff that have initiated and monitored that and making us far more accessible to our people, to our residents. So that's been fantastic. That was wonderful. The slight negative one was, again, and I know Mr. Nolan alluded to this, we really need to keep working on our internet access and being able to support all residents, that equity of access to things such as the internet and social media, things that can support people, particularly in our regional areas. So we'll certainly keep moving in that area, but I just wanted to highlight that again. That was brought up at the start of the meeting, and that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keogh. I might go to Councillor Reeson. Oak Award, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've had quite a quiet month. I've had a number of AGMs cancelled due to COVID issues and availability of somewhere to hold them indoors, which has been a bit troubling at times, but it's the time of our existence at the moment. I want to support Councillor Keogh's comments about vaccinations, where it's the way that we are going to get out of most of our problems, and being vaccinated and not hurting was a wonderful experience, having no issues afterwards. But I was interestingly explained to me today by Ms. Bramwell that the Pyrenees Shire is very well represented with those that are vaccinated. We're above the averages, and I want to thank all those people out there supporting our community and getting vaccinated. But those that aren't, please reconsider, please get out there, get yourself vaccinated. It's an important thing for our community. I'd like to thank the staff again. We've got the new pedestrian crossings in Avoca in the High Street. Lovely little garden beds and plants and flowers. Had a couple of complaints that people can't drive straight into their parking bays anymore. When I suggest to them that they got their licence by backing into a parking bay, they look at me silly. But they aren't interested in handing back their licence, so they're going to have to learn to back in where necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reeson. I'll go to Councillor Vance de Cameron Ward, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like other councillors, I guess, apart from our friend Councillor Clark, who is heavily involved with the MOV, my month has been reasonably quiet. I did attempt to join a Timber Towns meeting last week via the computer, but couldn't get in, so I finished up participating in the meeting on the phone, which is not much fun. Trying to keep pace with what's going on. Oh. Okay. Not yet. Doesn't want to go on.
Yeah, the Timber Towns meeting, I participated via the phone. It wasn't much fun. But anyway, a couple of things that come out of that meeting was that we're going to reactivate the tyres report. And I would suggest to our manager of assets and infrastructure that any information that we can feed in will be in the long run beneficial, not only to us, but to the industry as well in the way of roads. It was interesting to note last week that the VAC report went through the lower house by a margin of 4 votes, but when it got presented to the upper house, it was blocked. So it's sitting on a table at the moment, and we are, when I say we, the Timber Towns group, are frantically lobbying 3 or 4 independents to see if we can't get the whole VAC report put on the back burner and go back and revisit. And I think there's a big chance that it might happen. We'll keep the fingers crossed, because I'm not sure that locking our people out of our forests is the way to go. We've seen the result of the massive bushfires down in Gippsland last year and into New South Wales, and locking forests up is a great idea for some, that, but I'm not sure that in the long run it's the best outcome for our country as a whole. The Rural Councils Victoria have shifted their meeting days from the 2nd Friday of the month to the 4th Friday of the month now. So I've got a meeting coming up next week there. Can't report too much from there. I had a site visit to Sheltered Paddock at the request of new owners who are putting together a proposal which will hopefully come to fruition and be another attraction for the Pyrenees wine region in the Moonabel area. As we all know, we've had a massive loss with some disaster at Warramang, and Delwynnie's changed hands and now do not have any more cellar door visits. And Teltani are flat out producing wine, but they've knocked off their cellar door visits, I think, to a certain degree. I can't swear to that. But realistically, apart from Summerfields, who provide food, there's not too many other options in the Moonabel end of the Shire. And over the years, it's been our flagship for the Pyrenees wine region. So I'm hoping, keeping fingers crossed, that we've got a new entity that might bring some visitors back into the area. I'd like to thank the staff from the planning department that were very prompt in getting up to Landsborough meeting with Robert Hodgetts last week, and they've given him a way forward. So fingers crossed once more, we might get our store open in Landsborough again sooner rather than later. And the last thing I want to bring up is an email that I received from Craig Wilson from the Pyrenees Advocate, suggesting that we might utilise his paper with some of our projects that are coming to completion. I guess it's a cry from Craig to get a bit more involvement in the local press, but we saw on some figures today that there's probably 30+% of people within our shire that still are not internet savvy, and a lot of them are in the older generation that utilise the press. I know up home the Pyrenees Advocate is very popular, lots more so than some of the others. So I don't know what other councillors think, but I think it's probably, I always was a great believer in utilising the press. The message got out when we had a visit from a former Prime Minister in the Oval over here at Beaufort. He made a comment which is not coming to me immediately, but it was spread across Australia the next day. So people do read the press, even in Canberra. They get a copy and somebody's paid to read it. So I'm just suggesting that we might still, as opportunities present itself, we might work with Craig. That's all from me. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, councillor Vance. Councillor Clark, Ursel, then Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I haven't had a quiet month, but at least I haven't had to travel to Melbourne, which has been really, really nice. I think I've had something nearly every day with MOV, but on Zoom it actually is pretty civil, and you can still wear your farm gear and your shorts, and no one actually notices. It's really quite good in that sense. I'd just like to pick up Councillor Keogh's point about COVID in the situation. I think, again, our community is doing as proud as we would have expected them to. And the move to now getting our children vaccinated as well, I think is a really important point that I hope will help actually get some of the adults as well to think, well, geez, if the kids are out doing it, we better get out and do it as well. I do think, having talked to a few mayors around the state this week, we're coming into a very interesting stage where we've been about a no, can't have it in the community. So within a couple of months, we're going to actually have it in the community in a really, really big way. And we as local government are going to have a pretty key role in taking our communities on that journey, because we haven't been in that space before. And it's going to be a fairly tough couple of months when we get 3,000-4,000 cases happening a day in the state, which is what's been predicted in that sense of things. But that's what we need to move through to get us back to some kind of a sense of normality. So there'll be work for us all to do in our patches, I think, in that sense of things. Just in terms of the Ursel Doone patch, the meetings both at the Warburg Hub and also at the Lexington Recreation Reserve. It was a bit of a holding pattern meeting at Lexington. They had their 3-year meeting, and they're just waiting, of course, for their hub to be finished so that they can actually form a new committee to manage that. That'll bring some new people in, which will be really good. I've had a few individual resident matters, and of course, MOV's been busy, and a couple of meetings with ALGA, of course, particularly working on the federal election campaign, which has been most important. Very pleasantly, I met with Emma Germano, and councillors and officers will remember Emma came and spoke to us during our budget process around rates and those kind of things, and had a really good meeting with her with my MOV hat on. And there's a lot of things of mutual interest across us around things like infrastructure, things like the Grampians West Pipeline and the East Pipeline and those types of other projects. The same thing for Natty Alley, that has a real interest to her. The camping on public land one, which is probably less of a concern for us, but certainly a concern across the sector. And just talking about rating generally in terms of where are some mutual things that we can do in that context. So very, very useful. And last Friday, the Mayor and I attended with my MOV hat on, had a meeting with Ali Cupper. Ali Cupper is the independent member for Mildura, and to say she's anything less than a terrier would be to downplay her. She's absolutely got to be in her bonnet about rates in a rural context. And she's in Parliament. You know, she's an independent in that sense of things, but she is someone that's inside the house in that sense, and she's very keen to do some work on rural rating and get us a better deal. And she has the ear of the minister by the look of things. So we're very keen to work with her. And she was talking to the 13 small rural councils around Victoria, who, like us, are very much in a similar situation. We need money for our assets, and we just simply need money to be able to do our things, and we don't have anywhere else to go other than rates. So whatever else the government can do to help us will be good things. So I hope that will deliver something for us in the next 6 to 8 months. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Yes, I'll take on from that. That was interesting, and there's, just for the benefit of the people watching, that there's a regional rate reform campaign occurring, and that's aimed at trying to source some continuous or sustainable funding for rural councils, and to try and address the disparity between the rates between rural and metropolitan areas. And it's a really good piece of work, and it's very interesting, and some very clever people have been involved in that process. So I'll be very interested to see what the response will be and the outcomes. And but I thank Ali for pushing that agenda, because it's so important, and of course it certainly well and truly affects Pyrenees Council front and centre. And I've had a number of meetings with constituents prior to the last council meeting, and a lot of the discussion has been about rates, so it's quite timely, I think. Many of the events are still being postponed or cancelled because of the uncertainty around the restrictions and when they might ease and when they might change or provide some ability for these events to happen. So, you know, the Beaufort Town Market, I think it's been postponed, the opening, the Arts Festival and even the Deb Ball. So they're all significant events within the town, and they're events that the community really look forward to. So, you know, putting them off and off and off, and that uncertainty is really disappointing, and because the community is crying out to get out and about and be involved in those events. And that's, you know, everyone from the school kids or the preschool kids right up to the elderly. So that's important. The Landsborough store, that's an ongoing project, and I really hope that we can get that opened up sooner rather than later for council events, and particularly the Landsborough community, who certainly are deserved and needing a store there. And as we know, it's a store in a small country town is much more than a store. It's a meeting place. It's where a lot of things originate. Community projects originate. You meet at the store and have a discussion, and things happen a bit like meeting at the pub. Some good things do come out of the pubs, and a lot of good things come out of those little country stores over a chat and a cup or so. It's really important that if we can get that up for Landsborough sooner rather than later. I was involved in the Western Bulldogs Youth Leadership Program graduation, where several students from Beaufort were involved in that, and I think Councillor Keogh was involved in that too. First thing I can say is I'm just so thankful for the Western Bulldogs Youth Leadership Program Committee for their perseverance in having to have, you know, change it from face-to-face meetings to virtual, all those things, but they persevered through the year and they got to graduation. And, you know, those kids that you know, participated in that event can only, you know, they got so much out of it, and every one of them certainly acknowledged that. And it was really pleasing to hear some of those testimonials about what they actually did get out of it. So, and it's certainly a lot. So I thank the kids for their participation and their perseverance in hanging in there and getting to the graduation, and the Western Bulldogs Youth Leadership Program Committee for persevering as well. Just a couple of more things. I participated in the regional mayoral briefing recently, and that's where mayors across the region participate. It was a virtual meeting, of course, and they discussed a lot of things. But what's quite interesting is a lot of things get discussed when you're on mute, and you hear the issues, the woes, and all these other things that are happening in a lot of our councils, and a lot of them are neighbouring. And what I can tell you from that is that we're tracking along pretty good, because we certainly don't appear to have a lot of those issues internally and externally that some of our neighbouring colleagues and the mayors, the councils involved in that briefing do. So I guess what I'm saying is we seem to be tracking along pretty well. So that's really pleasing to know. And I'd just like to close on the vaccinations things. I've had my 2 shots. I'm fully vaccinated, and I'm very glad that I am. So, and I wouldn't hesitate if I had to have a booster or something. I wouldn't. If I had to go and get vaccinated again, I wouldn't. So it's so important. I think it's the way forward, and I just encourage others to do the same. So that's it from me. That brings us to the close of our meeting, and our meeting is closed at 8:03 p.m.